What is good, everybody? Welcome to Under Review here on the Gold Standard Podcast Network. I'm Rob Stats Guerrera. He's Vish Kumaran. Vish, I was in such a hurry to start the show, I didn't even get the background ready. Shame on me.
Shame on you, Rob.
There we go. Now I have fixed it, and it looks pretty. We got a little breaking news nationally. We got breaking 49ers news. Before we get started, the main thing I want to touch on today is the Mike Evans contract and whether or not that affects Brandon Aiyuk. But there's other stuff. There's other breaking 49ers stuff, Vish. So let's get to that, because right before we hit record, we got the news that the Niners are replenishing the coaching cupboard, so to speak, and they are hiring former Seahawks linebacker KJ Wright as an assistant linebackers coach. Your thoughts?
I think this is a great move. I don't know how many people have had the opportunity to hear KJ Wright talk about football, but he's been in the media for the last year and a half or so since he's retired. And he's one of the smartest people I've heard when he's analyzing the game. Slightly biased as an analyst. I respect that, though, because he bleeds Seahawks colors. But he's excellent when it comes down to breaking down the game. I thought he was the most underrated player on the Legion of Boom defense. He was truly an excellent player. If you really watched that defense and you looked at what they did schematically and what he was asked to do, he was a great player. In his day, he was a very intelligent player, high IQ player. I think the stuff he did in coverage, the stuff they asked him to do, really benefited Bobby Wagner. In some ways, he was a guy who did the dirty work a little bit more for Bobby Wagner, and he didn't get as much credit for that because Bobby Wagner would get the stats. And that's no disrespect to Bobby Wagner. It just speaks to how great KJ Wright was. I think this is a great hire. I think he's got an opportunity to be on the D'Amico Ryans track. At least that's how he comes across to me in my limited interactions of watching him in the media. I think this is a home run. I wouldn't be shocked if he's their defensive coordinator in a few years.
That last thing, I think, is maybe what Kyle Shanahan is possibly thinking as well. Obviously, we know they love DCs with that linebacker experience, right? They don't really have a ton of that with Sorensen and Staley, which we'll discuss that at the end of the episode as well. But I've always talked about, I give Kyle a ton of credit for constantly having guys to go to and his ability to hire coaches, to find guys he thinks would be good coaches one day. And I think that's exactly what Kyle Shanahan is doing. You could be the assistant linebacker coach. You're also a defensive quality control coach. Quality control is basically like a catch-all title for whatever the hell they want you to do. And I think this is going to be like a study year, basically, for KJ Wright. Like, learn the system, learn what it is to be a coach like that in the league. And I think this is a great move by the 49ers. I don't love former Seahawks coming on the staff. Like, that still, gives me, I don't love it, but I think it is a smart move by Kyle.
Oh, I love it because he was such a great player for when they were a great team. He was an outstanding player. And Red and Gold Till I'm Dead Cold podcast puts in the chat perfectly. It's hard not to immediately make the D'Amico comparison. In a lot of ways, I don't think it's just Rob. Like, KJ Wright was a great football player. You look at his character, he was a former champion. He was tough as nails. He played down in and down out. He was such a physical player. He represents culturally and character-wise all the things the Niners look for. That's who D'Amico was on the field, and it turns out D'Amico is that times two off the field, and that's why he went from quality control in 2017 to head coach in 2023, which is an unheard of track for anybody in the NFL. And so I think that, maybe comparing somebody to a prodigy like D'Amico is a little bit of a tough ask, but KJ Wright can be that kind of guy. And then I implore everybody to just listen to him in the media. He's a great communicator. He breaks down the game very, very well. I think that he was outstanding as an analyst, and that's my way of saying I think he would be a great coach because, yeah.
And also, like, what have you got to lose if you're the 49ers, right? I mean, this is like no risk, all reward. If he doesn't work out and you get him in the building and you feel like it's not a fit or it's not going to work, okay, then you send him on his way the following year and it's fine, But if it does pay off and you get a guy that's kind of like in that D'Amico mold, now you're set at defensive coordinator, possibly. It's going to make your team better, obviously. I think it's a solid move by the Niners. I'm kind of out of left field, but awesome.
Right, really out of left field, and I wonder if he would have been doing this for Seattle if Pete Carroll had stayed. And that to me is kind of the underrated point in all of this. Seattle getting rid of Pete Carroll, going to Mike McDonald, to me means KJ Wright has come here. And then Rob, you've been around the league for so long, covering it at ESPN, NBC, all those different places. Coaching is one of the biggest grind jobs you
Oh,
could have in the world. You
yes.
have to put in so many hours to do that job. And I think this is really the question for somebody like KJ Wright, because you've been a great player. You've made a lot of money. You're successful. You're good in the media too. Do you want to put in that grind as a coach? And he'll get to find out this next year. And I think if he does, I think he really would be he's really going to end up being a great coach.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. And honestly, too, it might have been a situation where maybe Kyle picked up the phone and called Pete Carroll and said, "Hey, would you be interested in being a defensive coordinator?" And Pete Carroll might have been like, "Hell no." But if you're looking for coaches, maybe you should hire KJ Wright. It could have been, or maybe he just called Pete Carroll to call him. And, after Pete decided to walk away or was fired, or whatever you want to call it, from the Seahawks, maybe Kyle just texted him or whatever and said, "Hey, I'm going to miss playing again." You don't know how that communication went.
There's so many connections, right? One, he's played against KJ Wright for 5 years. He played against him year after year after year, twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the connection because they adopted the Seattle scheme. There's the Dan Quinn connection. There's the Robert Saleh connection. There's so much carryover defensive staff to defensive staff. So you're right. There's a lot of different ways this could have gone down for the 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, and KJ Wright to be connected for this to happen. But I think it's really cool. I loved him as a player. That's why.
I think it's a great move. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe this is just because of Antonio Pierce, because I feel like Antonio Pierce's whole staff with the Raiders is all former players. I think there's a ton of former players working on staffs around the league now.
Yeah, 100%. And I heard Warren Sapp talk about this. Maybe it might have been a little while ago. He was doing an interview with Rich Eisen. And this was when Dion was having his success immediately. And he was talking about the benefit of having former players on your staff. And I don't know if anybody's heard Warren Sapp talk recently, but Warren Sapp is still like really, really smart when it comes to football, in my opinion. And so he's really interesting to talk to. And he said basically that a lot of more former players would coach and they're capable of coaching. It's the grind. He said he wants to fish, so he doesn't want to coach. And that's really what gets in the way. It's the hours coaches end up working. I mean, I look at Shanahan. You don't do a job that's 9 to 5 and go from 2017 looking like that to 2024 looking like that. No offense.
Yeah, no, it is an absolute grind. You're right. And I don't blame, these guys are supposed to be retired, and then you're going to go into an 80-hour-a-week job. Like, I don't blame any of them who doesn't want to do it. Obviously, KJ Wright does. He's coming aboard for the 49ers. That is awesome. We can get into the defensive coordinator stuff a little bit later. That's sort of older stuff, which I do want to talk about with you because I haven't had a chance to discuss it. But the main topic of the show, I wanted to be Mike Evans and Brandon Aiyuk. For anybody that isn't aware, Mike Evans signed a 2-year contract with the Buccaneers today, or at least agreed to. 2 years, $52 million, $35 million guaranteed. And the reason I bring it up at all is obviously because the 49ers supposedly are going to be negotiating with Brandon Aiyuk. And we know, Vish, that the Niners are brutal when it comes to negotiations. And I just wonder if they're going to look at this and be like, all right, Brandon, Evans is getting, for the sake of this discussion, $26 million a year, right? We're happy to offer you 3 years, $20 million a year with $45 million guaranteed. And Brandon Aiyuk is going to be mad by that, but I think the Niners could use this. They could say, look, Mike Evans has 10 years in the league. He's had 1,000 yards every single year. He's had 10 touchdowns or more almost every single year. And that's what he got. He got 2 years, $52 million. He's got more Pro Bowls than you.
I'm going to pause you there because I don't think they're going to use Evans. I don't think Evans really matters. He's so deep into his career. And you look at the length of contract, I don't think Aiyuk is going to be even in the conversation with Evans's deal. I think who they're going to use, I think they are going to do something like what you said, but I think they're going to use the other guy that just negotiated 2 years ago. They're going to say he came to the negotiating table with the first team All-Pro season. You're coming with the second team All-Pro season.
Who's this? Who are we talking about? Debo?
Debo.
I don't know. If I were the Niners,
because that's more of a similar situation. Why does Mike Evans' contract matter? Mike Evans is 30. This is his last contract. Brandon Aiyuk is looking for his first contract.
He's the most recent guy that signed. That's why it matters. And Mike
But
Evans just led the league in
But look
touchdowns.
at
Who cares how old he is?
But look at where Mike Evans's deal is relative. Like when you're talking about 26 million, he's sitting there with Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and then Stephon Diggs is right under them. Between them is AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, and then T. Higgins, who just got tagged. Brandon Aiyuk is going to be looking for a deal in the range that those guys got. That's the extension format. DK, Deebo, T. Higgins, they're all in the same conversation there. Evans, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Cooper Kupp are a different conversation. They're in a different point in their career. The way they're going to negotiate their contracts is going to be a little different.
Oh, I'm sure that Aiyuk is going to look at those guys, but I think the Niners are going to use this as like their opening offer, and they're going to base it on Evans is.
But it's not close to Evans, the opening offer you're suggesting. But it's also not close to the guys that Aiyuk is going to use. That's why it doesn't make sense to me why you would use Evans. Like, if you're going to go to Evans, why not just go to Tyreek Hill at that point if you're Aiyuk?
Because Evans just signed. It's the most recent.
Yeah, but Evans is a true free agent. He's not asking for an extension, right? He would have hit the open market.
He would have hit the market.
He's a true free agent. He's produced with a team that he has been with for a long period of time. He's already received a preliminary extension from this team. It's a different situation than Brandon Aiyuk, who got drafted by this team and is not going into a contract year. He still has one more year left from the deal. He's looking for an extension, and he's off of his rookie contract trying to get his first contract. I can't look at those two deals and be like, yeah, that's going to make sense.
Or how many million per year do you think that Aiyuk is going to want?
I think Aiyuk is going to want the same, like 26 to 30, because that's where the top of the league is. But I think the Niners are going to try to get Aiyuk under Deebo. That's what I think is going to happen.
Evans just got 26.
I think the Niners are going to try to get Aiyuk under Deebo. I think that's who they're going to compare to.
I think the Niners are going to lowball the hell out of him, especially at first, right? Because that's sort of what they do.
But that's what they do.
That's negotiating 101. And that's what I mean. I think they're going to be like if they could get Aiyuk to sign for 26, I think the Niners would do it right now. Don't you?
I don't know. I just said Deebo's at 23. I think that they'll get him. I think they'll try to get him lower than Deebo. I think that's why Deebo matters in this negotiation, because Deebo came with the first team All-Pro season. Now, where I did this wrong in terms of me explaining this right now, because I didn't know we were really going to do this topic, is that I should have looked up where Deebo was when he got his deal. So when Deebo got his deal, where did his annual average line up? Because I think there's been a couple extensions since Deebo got his deal. That's what I did wrong, so I'm not sure about that. But Deebo next year, I think, is at 23. I'm the 49ers, I don't know if I would do this, but assuming the 49ers are going to start the negotiation, with I don't think they're going to try to pay him more than Deebo.
Aiyuk, I think, has a better argument than Deebo. Deebo had one good year. Aiyuk's had more good years than Deebo.
But Deebo had a first-team All-Pro season. That was the thing. Deebo took this team into the playoffs. Deebo produced in the playoffs. Deebo single-handedly won games for the 49ers. Deebo was in the Offensive Player of the Year conversation. Deebo is marketing, too. Deebo in 2021 had way more marketability than Brandon Aiyuk at any point in his career.
Yeah, that's true. And now he's going to have even more because he's changing his jersey number.
Oh, is he?
Supposedly he's going to number 1, I think. But
the question is, do you think how contentious do you think this negotiation will? Because I'm under the impression that it will get contentious because that's just Niners negotiations.
Yes.
But they'll get the deal done, obviously. But do you think they'll ultimately get the deal done for what I'm speculating, which is they'll get Aiyuk under Deebo?
I don't know, man. If I'm Aiyuk, I say no.
I think they'll get it. I think it'll be clever the way they do it. They'll have him under Deebo initially, and then his contract will build up. He'll be another one of these really backloaded deals. And yeah.
Nick Ellert.
I expect them to get this done.
Nick Ellert says Deebo has put the team on his back. Kyle hasn't given Aiyuk that chance. I think
Aiyuk has played games when these other playmakers are hurt, right?
I think Aiyuk would say, you never let me put the game on my back. You never, make the game plan for me to put it on my back. If you gave me that opportunity, I think Aiyuk's team would say, I will. Let me show you.
Yeah, and I believe I'll say this. I believe he has the ability to do that. But if I'm the 49ers, I respond with, you've had opportunities when Debo and Kittle haven't played. The Browns game, you were the guy. Debo and Kittle didn't play. I think they targeted him like 11 or 12 times in that game.
10.
It didn't, 10 times. Okay. That was not a great game for him. And that's just an example off the top of my head. But those are the kind of arguments I think that they will have. Because Aiyuk has had opportunities. He's been the guy that's been healthy most of the time. And we've seen his production also slip when Debo is not there or when Kittle is not there.
Which is why the point you made a few months ago, Vish, I thought was so smart. People always say, oh, Purdy benefits from McCaffrey. And it's like, yes, but they all benefit from each other. Everybody benefits from everybody else. Corey Soto says, if I'm Aiyuk and they won't pay me more than Debo, thank you. Next. I kind of agree, to be honest with you.
But they're not gonna look at Debo now. They're gonna look at Debo at the time of his deal, because that's when it's similar to Aiyuk. Do you remember why the 49ers didn't pay Mike Upati back in the day?
No, honestly, I don't.
It's because if you remember, they extended Joe Staley in 2010 when he was still relatively cheap. At the time, the Niners had identified they had an excellent left tackle in Joe Staley, but the fan base really did not think Joe Staley was that good. And it was a point of contention.
You're still on this Joe Staley thing.
Yeah, I am on it because sometimes this fan base needs a little bit of reminding that you take some crazy opinions out there. And so they didn't pay. They gave Joe Staley an extension. Joe Staley never asked for an extension after that. He was underpaid in 2011, in 2012, in 2013. He never asked for the second extension, and they couldn't pay Mike Upati in free agency because they didn't want to pay him more than Joe Staley.
So, and that relates to this situation how?
Because it's a similar situation in terms of they already have a star player that they have set the tone for at this position. Now, Staley was still playing better. I think Debo still played pretty well this year. I think a lot of people are using the Super Bowl to say Debo sucked when a week ago in the NFC Championship game, he was probably their second best offensive player after Christian McCaffrey. So it's a similar situation because they already have a guy who set the market at that position. They're not going to overpay him. Go look at, did Navarro Bowman make more than Patrick Willis when he got his first extension? I highly doubt it.
I don't know.
He
Debo,
got his first extension, I think, after 2011, after a second team all-pro season where he didn't make the Pro Bowl, similar to.
We're kind of getting a little off track, but since you brought it up, I mean, Debo Samuel, what was the big comment from him before the year, right? Oh, I was horrible in 2022. Mm-hmm. Was he that much better in 2023?
No, not really.
Really.
Scored some more touchdowns. That was
the thing. I mean, he had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, over 1,100 to be fair. And he did score way more in 2023 than he did in 2022. But I feel like he wasn't that much better.
Oh, look, Rob, I'm not taking this to say, like, I think Debo is a better long-term player than Aiyuk. I think the 49ers should pay Aiyuk. I think Aiyuk is the one ascending weapon on this team. I think long-term they should build around Aiyuk. I don't feel that about Debo. I'm just predicting how I think the negotiation will go down. And if you don't think the 49ers are going to bring up the fact that Debo was a first-team All-Pro and they were still able to keep his number to a certain point and they're not going to talk about that to Aiyuk, you're crazy.
Oh, they will.
Of course they're going to bring that up. Of course that's going to be a number they're going to try to keep him under.
Yeah, I agree that they're going to do everything they can. They're going to pull everything out of the woodwork to try and keep the number down. That's how they negotiate. I mean, look, they're trying to sign him. If he would sign for $1, they would sign him for $1. Like they want the lowest possible rate, that's just how it works. We'll see how it turns out. There was a report that I think it was Rap Sheet said that the Niners are going to enter in negotiations with Brandon Aiyuk after free agency.
Makes sense.
Which the new league year starts next week, by the way, technically a week from today. March 11th is the quote-unquote legal tampering, which, by the way, let me point out again. I said it before, the Combine. There's massive tampering at the Combine. How do we know this? Because Mike Evans just signed a 2-year contract for $52 million. You think he signed that without knowing what the market was for him?
Right.
You think his agent didn't ask around at the Combine? You think he signed that deal, by the way, before he knew what was going to happen with Baker Mayfield?
Right.
I would be stunned if Baker Mayfield isn't back on the Buccaneers. And there's
And I'm sure Ayuk's agent did the same thing. He
yes.
has an idea of what Brandon Ayuk's value is right now. They'll
Yep.
go through free agency with a similar idea, and that's why they're going to then start negotiating then. And it's a perfect time period because the 49ers also need to know how far apart they are from Brandon Ayuk. How
Mm-hmm.
realistic is it that they're going to get a deal? I think they should get a deal done. I think that they want to. I think both sides want to. But if it's unrealistic, the Niners need time to then come up with their next plan, which would then be to get rid of Brandon Ayuk and possibly draft a receiver. And so that's why they're going to start negotiating before that draft time, because the Niners, even though they might want to keep Ayuk, have to be prepared for the situation that them and Ayuk might be too far apart to feasibly get a deal done.
I saw a report that Aiyuk wants like a promise that he's going to be the featured guy in the offense going forward. I have no idea if that's true or not. I'm sure he would like more targets because I've never met a wide receiver ever that didn't want more targets.
I think that stuff is just negotiating stuff. Do you remember when they said Debo didn't want to be a running back and Debo didn't want carries?
Yeah,
That's all just negotiating speculation.
that's true. And Debo, like, we never really got a real answer as to why he actually requested a trade, which
No,
is
he
really
never
weird.
told us. Yeah. He
Daza,
refused to answer the question when he was
yeah,
asked a couple of times, and then it was
couple
kind of
times.
that was it. Yeah.
Daza0187 says BA is also a willing and active blocker and turns up in shape, unlike Debo. It's 100% true, to be
But
honest.
people get too sensitive to this conversation. This isn't an Ayuk versus Debo conversation. Oh, somebody's putting down Brandon Ayuk when they say he might get less money than Debo. It's just a case of that's the reality of the business in the NFL. You can be upset about it all you want, but when Debo came to the negotiating table in 2021, he had more leverage than Brandon Ayuk in 2023.
Yeah,
Less people had been paid on this team. He was the most valuable weapon on the team.
what's your leverage? Like, what's your fastball if you're Brandon Aiyuk? What leverage do you have?
You play every game. The other guys don't.
Yeah. But half the time we don't even target you.
Yeah.
If I'm the 49ers, that's my response.
Right. I mean, he's a terrific player. He's a terrific player, but what's his fastball is the right question in this.
He shows up. Look what I would say. Look what I've done with the targets you've given me. Imagine if you featured me. I would say you're paying me for what I'm going to do for you, not what I have done.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
100%. And then if you're the Niners, right, you've invested so much in Brandon Aiyuk. That's where I think people miss it a little bit. Like, the Niners should want to get this deal done so bad. They were the ones who traded up to go draft Brandon Aiyuk. There's the ones who believed in Brandon Aiyuk. They had that kind of funny situation in his second year that we'll never know about. But besides that, they've stuck behind Brandon Aiyuk. This was a guy they believed in. Of course, they should want to extend him. He makes them look good. They traded up to draft him. He's turned out to be an excellent player.
I don't know. Honestly, like, I think fans have a hard time with the idea of draft a guy, try and make him as good as he could be, and then let him go. Like, you wanted Brandon Aiyuk to be as good as he could be, right? So that's why you did everything that you did with Brandon Aiyuk. To say you've got to re-sign him now because you put a lot of work into him, that, to me, I wouldn't necessarily think like that. Like, you put the work into him to try to make him better. That's what you're supposed to do when a guy's on your roster. But that doesn't mean that you have to then re-sign him.
I actually identified what his leverage is.
All right.
His leverage is, do you still think we're a win now team? Like, if you still think you want to go in all in next year, no matter who you trade me for, they're not going to, unless you go do the Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, which is a one shot, like a 1 in a million shot to draft Justin Jefferson and have him be that good right away year one. His leverage is that, because they're not going to be able to get a guy in the first round that's going to be realistically better than Brandon Aiyuk day one, because Brandon Ayuk's already a top 10 receiver in the NFL. And so that, I think, would be his leverage. Like, you need me today. If you want to go win tomorrow, I give us the best chance to win the Super Bowl over any first-round pick.
Great. So we'll sign you to a 1-year deal. Oh, wait, you're already playing on a 1-year deal.
Right. Right. That's where it gets a little tricky, but that would be what he would say.
Yeah, I agree. Corey Soto, thank you very much for the super chat. Ayuk's side will undoubtedly say, you don't utilize me enough. Would be top 3 in receiving elsewhere out of Debo, Kittle, etc. This is the contract I could see not getting done.
That Browns game is going to get shown up, man.
All we heard about at the combine is the wide receivers. Oh my God, the wide receivers. We had a guy break the 40-yard dash record. which is just insane. I was it 4.22 now?
4.21.
4.21. It's ridiculous. I don't expect the 49ers hate playing rookies, particularly rookie wide receivers. But I don't know. I do think you have to have a plan B, like you talked about. There was a comment that I wanted to get to. Where is it? Here we go. Jeremy Seekings says, if Aiyuk walks, does that mean, first of all, he can't walk. He's under contract for this season. So
yeah,
he's not
here
a free
this year
agent
for sure.
But does that mean Jennings moves to starter or signs a free agent like Hopkins because a rookie won't step in next year when learning Kyle's scheme? That's another thing if you're the 49ers, right? If they go wide receiver and like, let's just say they end up with a wide receiver in the first round. Maybe they're thinking is like, he'll have his redshirt year while Ayuk's still here. And then we can let Aiyuk go. And then this guy will be ready to step up.
That's also possible. But do they have other needs that are more pressing maybe than receiver? And that's a different kind of question. And then maybe you still lose Aiyuk for nothing, which is also a different question. I don't think Jennings would become the starter in that situation. I think they would draft or sign somebody else to become the starter. But I don't think that it takes a year either. Deebo Samuel started day 1, week 1.
True. And he was a second-round pick. Don't forget. It wasn't like he was a top 5 pick.
He started week 1 at Tampa Bay.
Yeah. Deebo breaks all the Kyle Shanahan wide receiver rules, though. Shows up out of shape, doesn't run hard. Apparently, he's never in the doghouse.
But Brandon Aiyuk also was injured and started week 3 versus the Giants, his first game. Brandon Aiyuk started the majority of his rookie year. Now, it was because of injury, but he still started basically the majority of his rookie year.
Nick Eller, YouTube channel member. Shout out to all our YouTube channel members. Love you. Appreciate you. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you're thinking about doing it, please do. It's less than $3 a month. You get priority comment response, membership badges, custom emojis. Please consider it if you would. Nick Eller says you franchise tag Aiyuk and trade him the next year. So you let Aiyuk play on the 5th-year option. Then you would franchise him for another year. Then you trade him, according to Nick.
Can you afford to franchise tag him?
That's the question. If the cap's going to go up another 30 million, maybe.
Well, yeah, that would be. I heard them talking about somebody that wasn't going to be franchised during the combine. I think I heard John Middlecoff mentioning it on a podcast. I'm blanking on it. I was listening to it late at night last night.
A Niner?
No, not a Niner. It was just this type of a situation where a team couldn't franchise a player because they didn't have the money to. And so they were basically going to lose him for nothing.
That's a damn shame.
Yeah.
I mean, generally, the Niners haven't lost people. Then, you know what? Say what you want. They haven't lost people for nothing.
Right. No. The Niners have conducted business as much as we've sat here and talked about it. The Niners in these type of situations have handled their business as good as you can ask them to. We just sit here and analyze it day by day by day by day by day until it happens. But I think they will make whatever is the best possible move they're capable of making. I don't doubt they'll make it. But I think a lot of people will be upset if they trade Brandon Aiyuk. I certainly would be. It's going to come down to this immediate negotiating period because I think the question of whether Brandon Aiyuk will be traded or not is not about whether they want to sign him or not. It's whether they think how reasonable they think a deal is, how feasible they think a deal is with him. Because if they come to the negotiating table and Aiyuk says, I want to be higher than Tyreek Hill, and the Niners are thinking to start at like 15 million to try and get to like 20 and between 20 and 24, they're going to trade him because they're going to be like, this isn't even going to happen no matter how much we negotiate.
Oh boy, we'll see how it all unfolds. But that was my reaction when I saw the Mike Evans move. My initial thought was, is this going to affect Brandon Aiyuk? Really quick before we get to some of the D coordinator talk, Vish, I just wanted to mention everybody saw the news, unfortunate news with the passing of Chris Mortensen of ESPN, legend in the business, was one of the first insiders, one of the first guys to go from print journalism to TV in the sports world. And he was an insider when we needed insiders, when they were your link to information about what is happening. Teams didn't have their own media. Teams didn't tweet out stuff. He was our link as fans to what was happening, not only in the league, but with certain teams and certain players. And somebody that I got to know when I worked at ESPN, he was universally respected and universally beloved. And unfortunately, Chris Mortensen died Sunday morning, I believe, and you've seen the tributes pouring in from everywhere.
Yeah, it's so sad. It's so sad. I loved Chris Mortensen. I loved him like in terms of I enjoyed his reporting. Anytime he would say something was gonna happen, it would always happen. That's how I always remembered Chris Mortensen. He's a legend. I feel like watching the draft when they would kick it to him and he would give you that one tidbit or that one rumor that would be so interesting in that moment. He was the man. Even when he was doing his job last year and year when he was clearly physically ailing, he was still so insightful. It was like, where did this guy have the time to make all of these calls? And yet he would still give you that information. He's a true legend. He's one of those people that it really shocked and hurt me to watch him go, even though I had no connection with the man, because so much of my football and TV watching experience included him and included me enjoying getting his information. It's sucks. RIP.
He broke the Peyton Manning retirement story like after he had stepped away from ESPN to undergo
Mhm.
cancer treatment. Like that
Mhm.
tells you everything you need to know about freaking Mort, who he would just like message you or call you and be like, "Hey, you did a really good job on this story." Like because he consumed it like we did as fans, and in addition to being like a huge part of it, and just off the air and stuff, he was an incredible guy. Like he would listen to the intern and he would listen to like the most senior producer at ESPN. Like the guy just loved football. He loved talking about it. And, I hate to say it, but I'm getting to the age, Vish. I mean, Chris Mortensen's gone now. John Clayton is gone. Like these were like foundational pieces of my childhood and my early sports fandom, and they're gone now, and it makes me feel so old.
Yeah, Rob, I would say that, you shouldn't use them as your barometer to feel old. You
Oh,
should
there's
just
so
look at
many
the
other
year
things, right,
the
Vish?
year you were born. Correct, correct, correct.
Shut up, you jerk.
I'm kidding, but I agree with you. I have a similar feeling about it, and it kind of it's weird. It's weird because even after he retired, like you mentioned, there would still be pockets of time where he would still come back on television, and when
Yep.
he would come on, he would be just bang, bang, bang. This is gonna happen. This is gonna happen. This team doesn't like this guy. It would be like Jay Glazer's like small minutes where it's like he says everything that's about to happen in a week, like in that little segment on Fox. It's like,
Yeah.
why haven't you been tweeting out this information actively? Like, why do you have to share it in this small pocket of time? That's how Mort kind of became.
I will have a hard time believing at the draft in April, like that we're not going to go to Mort. Like it won't, my brain will not be able to process that. But anyway, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes. I know this is not really 49ers news, but the guy was a legend. And obviously, we wish everybody, friends and family, comfort in this terrible time. There's no easy way to transition off of that, Vish. So I'll just acknowledge how awkward it is, but we are a 49ers show. So let's get back to 49ers news. I haven't had a chance to talk with you about the hirings of Nick Sorensen as defensive coordinator and Brandon Staley as assistant coach. My official position on this is I really, really, really want to hear from the 49ers and see what they say about what Brandon Staley's job responsibilities are going to do. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm saying it's incredibly unorthodox because I just can't get past the idea of Brandon Staley being a babysitter. And I don't know how that's going to play in the locker room with the players on this team. It's a very weird situation. You know what it reminds me of, Vish? It reminds me of the co-managers from The Office. When Jim does the day-to-day stuff and Michael Scott's doing the bigger picture stuff, it's
Yeah.
co-managers on defense. At least it seems that way right now.
I don't look at it that way.
All
I
right.
actually I actually kind of like it. So my immediate impression of them doing this is that they really wanted to hire Brandon Staley.
So
That's who
why
they
didn't they
really
hire
wanted as
him?
their defensive coordinator. But I think what they realized from the Steve Wilkes situation is that there's a larger communication detail that somebody from afar can't necessarily pick up from their culture. And they wanted to ensure that there's a cultural continuity in terms of that communication. I think they want Brandon Staley's ideas and philosophy, but I think communication wise, they wanted a person who knew how they communicate and how they do their process. And that's why they're going about it like this. I don't think it's as big of a deal as you think it is. I don't think Brandon Staley's babysitting Nick Sorensen. I think it's like hiring a senior run game coordinator, a senior, like, do you remember the Niners in 2014 hired Eric Mangini? Do you think he was babysitting Vic Fangio as their pass game specialist or whatever
Different.
his role was?
It's different. Vic
How is it
Fangio has
different?
more experience than Eric Mangini. That's the
Brandon
difference.
Staley has 1 year of experience.
Nick
1 year more
Sorensen
than
has
Nick
never
Sorensen.
called a defensive play in his
Brandon
life.
Staley did it 1 year before he got a head coaching job.
And how was he in that 1 year?
He was excellent.
Right. Nick Sorensen has never been a defensive coordinator before.
I think you're looking for a problem where there isn't one, Rob.
I'm not saying there's a problem. I'm saying there could be a problem. I think I think it's just weird, Vish.
So
if there's a problem with the game plan,
you wanted them to hire Brandon Staley after they went through this process of realizing communication didn't work with Steve Wilkes. That's what I'm confused about. We went over this. You and I agreed the day after the Super Bowl that they needed to fire Steve Wilkes because the communication didn't work. Did we not say that?
Yep.
You and I came the day after the Super Bowl and said they need to fire him. Now they have identified a person, and I want to know this is what I'm most interested in. What is Brandon Staley's evolution of this scheme that he has convinced Kyle Shanahan on? Because clearly
I would
there's
love
something.
to hear that.
Mike Silver wrote about the cloud coverage thing that then somebody else parroted and wrote in the thing. That's interesting. Maybe
not
they're
somebody
start
else.
Including
David Lombardi. Call him out.
Okay. But maybe they're going to start including some Fangio cover 6 principles. That includes a cloud corner there. Maybe they're going to start playing like that. I don't know. That's interesting to me. But in terms of them wanting Brandon Staley's philosophical mind, but understanding we ran into an issue last year with communication when we hired somebody just for their philosophy is not insane to me. I actually think it's smart.
Who's the defensive coordinator of this team then?
Nick Sorensen.
But he's not coming up with the game plan. That's Brandon
How
Staley.
do you know he's not coming up with the game plan?
Because you just said they wanted, that's the weird part about this to me. If you want Brandon Staley, then hire Brandon Staley. It seems like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Now, if the 49ers say, hey.
So you can't have 2 smart guys in your defensive staff. You can only have 1.
But you could have had that. You could have had Staley as the DC and kept Sorensen where he was.
Maybe,
that's the weird thing.
But maybe they're telling you that the issue was with Wilkes, that we brought him from the outside and put him in charge, and the communication was off.
But
maybe here's a thing for you. Maybe the communication with Wilkes, right? We talked about the Wilkes communication being off with Shanahan. We've talked about it being off with Bosa, and we've talked about it being off with Warner. What if it was off with Kasarik? What if it was off with Johnny Holland? What if it was off with Daniel Bullocks?
Then they should have fired him.
They need somebody to communicate with all of those guys. They want to keep. Why fire everybody? They like what they have.
No, they should have fired Wilkes, I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what they did.
Well,
but they don't want to bring in somebody else and have that communication be off.
But again, so if it was so off, right, then why not fire Wilkes during the year and let Sorensen coordinate the defense? That's why I need to hear from the 49ers on this. I have so many questions about this.
Maybe they didn't want to make a move at that time.
So what has changed with Nick Sorensen now that he's suddenly able to coordinate a defense where he wasn't, 10 weeks ago?
I don't know.
That's what I want to hear the 49ers answer.
But at the same time, maybe they feel like, look, because there is a difference, right? Because you're asking what has changed. Nothing might have changed between now and 10 months, but you might be more equipped to prepare a guy to do a job going through the offseason when you go through preparing, installing, and going through training camp with him on that job than you are to put him in week 6, week 7 with Super Bowl expectations. You can't certainly look at those 2 situations and be like, there needs to be something different between the guy.
Like, Rob, in case it doesn't work, you've got a babysitter there, right? That's why it's weird. If you wanted Staley to come up with your game plan.
Did you think Joe Woods was a babysitter for Robert Saleh?
I don't know.
Joe Woods, former defensive coordinator, worked with Kyle Shanahan in Tampa, came in as the pass game specialist after getting fired from Vance Joseph's staff.
So I wasn't as into the coaching staff at that point in 2017 because
that was 2019, buddy. Robert Saleh was on the hot seat coming into that
but I
year.
was still at PFT at that point, so I wasn't diving into the nitty-gritty of the 49ers assistant coaches. I may have thought differently. I may have thought the same.
They started playing a little more too high that year with Joe Woods. I'm just saying.
I'm not saying it can't work.
Because that dynamic worked, right? That worked. That's what this dynamic is to me.
To me, and maybe you're right. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I really got to hear from the 49ers on this, because I could see if as a player, you're coming in with the game plan. You're like, wait, I have a question about the game plan. Who am I asking? Am I asking Sorensen or am I asking Staley? Because if what you're telling me is that Sorensen is the translator, that Staley's going to come up with the game plan, then Sorensen's going to work his magic and translate it into a language that the other coaches and the players on this defense can understand.
Why would Staley be the sole guy coming up with the game plan? Like they want to keep a lot of defensive continuity, right? Like with their front and all of that. They don't want to change that. So I don't think Staley's changing that. I think that Staley brings an evolution to their defense that he has presented to them in this long process of them going through meetings that they want to add. And why not, instead of taking the idea from the guy, why not have him add to it? It's like bringing Kasarik in, dude. Salah isn't a wide 9 guy. Shanahan isn't a wide 9 guy. They wanted to add the wide 9 to their defense. Kasarik was who brought that.
Right, and that's what John Lynch said. He said, like, we evolved our defense. And
okay, so how is that different? Joe Woods evolved the defense too.
Why do you need to promote Nick Sorensen then? You could make Staley the defensive coordinator and Sorensen could have all that same input on the game plan.
Why did they need to not fire Robert Saleh after 2018 and just hire Joe Woods as the defensive coordinator?
I don't know. You have to ask them.
It worked, though, right? Because they believed in Robert Saleh as their defensive coordinator. They felt like they needed to add something else to help him. They believed in, who did I mention? They believed in Robert Saleh as their defensive coordinator. They felt like they needed to add Chris Kasarik to help him. He's not a wide 9 guy. That's all Chris Kasarik. They believe in Nick Sorensen. They feel like they need to add Brandon Staley to help him.
I think it's really weird that they interviewed Staley for defensive coordinator and then gave him a better job. I would love to ask them, like, he's the assistant head coach. He's higher up than the defensive coordinator.
Kind of.
What? Not kind of. He is.
Like, I've always wondered, wait, how does that work, though, with the assistant head coach? Like, did Anthony Lynn have, like, secondary power over Kyle to, like, tell the defensive coordinator stuff?
I guess it would depend on if Kyle delegated it.
Because I feel like I only think the assistant head coach matters when the guy gets fired, right? Because, like, John Embry was their assistant head coach for the longest time before Anthony Lynn. Did John Embry have power over the rest of the offensive coaches? Like, did he have more power than Mike McDaniel?
I think Anthony Lynn was there because Bobby Turner had to step away because of some medical issues. And so Anthony Lynn was there as a placeholder.
Yeah, but he got the assistant head coach title, right?
Right, because
when Anthony Lynn was there, Mike McDaniel was there as the offensive coordinator, right?
Yes.
No, Anthony Lynn Mike McDaniel wasn't there as the offensive coordinator. Bobby Slowick was the offensive coordinator.
I think they wanted somebody to handle the running backs. They wanted Anthony Lynn to do it. He was coming off being fired by the Chargers. And so I think they were like, I think
you're changing the point. I'm not asking why they hired Anthony Lynn. You said Brandon Staley has more power, has a better title than the defensive coordinator. Right. I'm asking you, they had this dynamic when John Embry was the assistant head coach and Mike McDaniel was the offensive coordinator. Who was in charge at that point? Because I frankly don't know. I don't understand that power dynamic. They've had this situation where Bobby Slowick was the offensive coordinator and Anthony Lynn was the run game specialist / running backs coach / removed from running backs coach / assistant head coach. And that again, did I assume Bobby Slowick was still the secondary command to Kyle as the offensive coordinator? So I again, you're bringing up a power dynamic that we've seen them have before, and it hasn't affected the other side of the ball.
But it's Kyle's offense. Kyle is the offense. So the titles he wants to give, Kyle doesn't want to deal with the defense. He wants this off his plate. I don't think Kyle Shanahan liked the fact that he had to be so involved in the defensive game plan for the Super Bowl. He wants, like he had with D'Amico, right? Dude, I know you're good. You got this. Go kick ass. I think that's what Kyle wants. And so to me, it just seems like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. You didn't have to make Nick Sorensen the defensive coordinator. There was no reason to do it. He was under contract. He was on your staff.
There was, though. They literally went through this last year. That's what I'm saying. Last year literally proves they needed somebody internal for their communication.
But why? Why?
Because it didn't work with Steve Wilkes.
You're
That's
not.
why.
Well, guess what? They're not hiring
Rob,
Steve Wilkes.
if they didn't hire somebody from internal and Brandon Staley was a complete flop, you would sit you're gonna have your cake and eat it too, because you're gonna sit here 5 months from now and say, we just saw that you guys hire somebody from outside, saw the communication work, and you did the exact same thing again.
First of all, I don't need you to come up with my takes for me, Vish. I'm fully
Okay,
capable
fair.
of doing it on my own. What is it? So you're saying that the 49ers they can't hear anything from an outside coach. Isn't it just, can't we say that maybe Steve Wilkes was just the wrong outside hire to bring in? Why does it have to be, well, Steve Wilkes couldn't get it done, so they could never hire anybody else from the outside ever again?
Okay, that's not what I said.
Well, what did you
I
say?
just said they went through a process where the communication didn't work,
right.
and therefore redoing it again. I didn't say you can never get an outside coach.
Well,
But
why not?
redoing it right away again is probably not the best thing for your team when you feel like we have an internal guy that can keep that communication. I've given you examples of this exact power dynamic existing. Joe Woods and Robert Saleh was this, except Joe Woods wasn't the assistant head coach. People were calling for Robert Saleh's job coming into 2019. And they brought a powerful defensive line coach who was implementing his own defensive line scheme. And they brought a pass game coordinator in Joe Woods, who had just been a defensive coordinator, had been a defensive coordinator longer than Robert Saleh, had more experience with Kyle Shanahan than Robert Saleh. And they brought him as the pass game coordinator. And Robert Saleh was still the guy in charge of the defense. And they made that power dynamic work perfectly.
Let me ask you this. If the defense is bad and they fire Nick Sorensen, who's going to be the defensive coordinator?
It'll be Brandon Staley.
Of course, it's going to be Brandon Staley, because that's the guy they wanted all along.
What point is that proving, though?
The point is this. If you want Brandon Staley to be your defensive coordinator, then hire him to be your defensive coordinator. The setup they have now is bizarre.
What if they didn't?
It is bizarre. You interviewed him to be your defensive coordinator, so they thought he should be their defensive coordinator. I think it looks right now, and again, as I said, I want to hear from them. I want to hear them explain this move, explain what their thinking is. To me, it looks like if we hire Brandon Staley, we're going to get killed because we just brought in an outside guy and that didn't work. So we're going to promote internally to try to avoid that. But really, Staley's going to be the guy that's kind of come up with our defense.
What makes you think Staley's coming up with the defense, though? We've just gone over this entire 2 off seasons about how the Niners have their system. They don't want to change. We're talking about Staley bringing an evolution to their defense, the way the wide 9 was an evolution to their defense. What makes you think that they're completely changing their system and Brandon Staley is just the guy that's going to fully change it?
I never said they're going to completely change their system. I never said that.
You just said he's the guy that's going to be coming up with the defense. I'm telling you the defense exists, whether Brandon Staley comes in, whether Nick Sorensen's there.
Well, he's going to be the guy coming up with the defensive game plans. I'm not saying he's going to change them to a 3-4.
But that's never been said. You're assuming that.
If they want him for his mind.
Because they might, like I said at the beginning, they might think he might have presented an evolution to this defense to Kyle that they want to add. That doesn't mean they want him calling their defense. They might just want to add that evolution the way they added the wide 9, the way they started playing a lot more split safety coverage in 2019 thanks to Joe Woods.
So why'd they interview him to be the defensive coordinator? Why not
Maybe they originally thought he would be that. Like, Rob, can't they not interview from their defensive coordinator job, not think of him as the right fit to be their defensive coordinator, but still feel like he could be an asset for what he presented?
Yeah, but then they gave him a better title. They gave him a better job. They gave him assistant head coach.
I'm still trying to explain. I'm still trying to understand how that dynamic is going to work because we've seen them have a coordinator and have an assistant head coach under the coordinator.
He doesn't have any other duties right now, as far as we know. It's just assistant head
coach. What if they name him pass game coordinator?
Well, that's why I said I want to hear from the 49ers.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. We got to know more about this, is what I'm saying. Because I think it's a very weird situation. And I think it potentially could create issues with the players. If they need to make clear to the players who's in charge, who's coming up with the game plan, who to go to with questions. Because I think the last thing Kyle wants is to have to mediate, issues with the defense in terms of Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley and all that. He doesn't want that on his plate.
Yeah, I agree with that part.
Chris Maldonado, YouTube channel member for 10 months. Thank you very much. Chris says, I don't know, the whole thing was kind of odd to me. I think so too.
I agree the process was a little bit odd, but I don't think hiring two different coaches is as odd.
It seems odd when you seems like they're hiring them to do the same job. That's why I think it's odd.
They're not
Especially they
though.
announced it at the same time too. Like the whole thing is, I'm telling you, I think it's weird to me. I really want to hear from them.
You
In
just
fact,
said Staley didn't have a title, and now you're saying they hired him for the same job.
yeah, he does. Well, his official title is assistant head coach.
Yeah.
But I mean, literally, it was like, oh, 2 hires announced for the 49ers, Nick Sorensen and Brandon Staley. It was like, they just want to do a P. I feel like there was a
Maybe
lot of
they
like,
took this extra week to see if it could work, right? They could have maybe thought Nick Sorensen was the defensive coordinator a while ago. Maybe they took this extra week to see if it could work with him and Brandon Staley, and then they announced it together.
well, that's an interesting question, right? Because if you're going to do this, I feel like you have to be pretty confident that Brandon Staley and Nick Sorensen can work together.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you figure that out. Like, I don't know how you figure that out in that amount of time. Because to me, it's like, you don't know if you can live with somebody until you live with them. You can't just ask them to fill out a survey about like, oh, what kind of a roommate would you be? Like, there's only one way to know.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right there.
You seem frustrated, Vish.
No, I'm not frustrated.
You don't like my
No, I was just thinking about the fact that like I have been through the situation where you fill out a flyer for a roommate.
Yeah, and it always
So,
sucks,
yeah,
right? It's not the
I didn't end up going in that direction, but yeah, I've heard mixed reviews.
you can't. The only way you know if you can live with somebody is when you live with them, and you figure it out pretty fast after the fact. So we're probably not going to hear from the 49ers, unfortunately, I would imagine, until the league meetings, which is the end of the month, March 24th, it looks like. I guess in theory, if they make a big free agent splash, they might have a press conference, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask them about that. And maybe that'll happen. We don't know, but we might not hear from them for a while.
The part of this that I'm just missing in all of this, and I guess this is where I think we kind of part ways, is that I don't necessarily see like how I've seen so many instances where a young coach has hired a veteran coach directly under them who might have more experience or have head coaching power or be in that kind of situation just to assist them because they have more experience. They've been in that situation. So that's where I don't really see the bizarreness to this power dynamic because I've seen this power dynamic before. Now, you can say the bizarreness is the fact that they announced them hired on the same time, but I think they also went through a unique situation last year where the communication didn't work. So I understand why they're hesitant to immediately then announce in the same situation once again. They might like this dynamic because of that. And that's what I don't get. Like, you're like, oh, they hired Nick Sorensen, but Brandon Staley is there and over his shoulder. But I've seen that dynamic where there's been a young coordinator and a veteran quarterbacks coach and stuff like that many times before. I don't think that there's necessarily a power structure or a power struggle. It's more about getting the young guy the support he needs because another guy might have done the job already and have experience to help him.
But the quarterbacks coach is under the coordinator in the hierarchy.
But you're saying that the assistant head coach is above him in the hierarchy, but then you won't tell me if John Embry was above Mike McDaniel.
I don't know.
Exactly, but then you're saying here he's under him. You don't know if he's under him.
What would lead you to in terms of assistant head coach?
I'm saying I don't know, but you're saying that you know for a fact Brandon Staley's above Nick Sorensen.
Well, that's what we can assume right now. I mean,
if that's true, then John Embry was above Mike McDaniel.
I don't know if he was. I would assume that he was.
Then you wouldn't know.
I would assume that he was. Because assistant head coach seems like the second most powerful person.
Assumption. You're operating under that assumption. I'm not operating under that assumption. So that's where we part ways, I guess.
Head coach, assistant head coach. Like in the organizational chart, if you knew nothing about an organization, wouldn't you say that the assistant head coach would be the second most powerful person in that organization?
That's what I'm not sure about. That's what I'm not sure about because of examples like this. That's what I've been trying to explain. Like, I don't know that because I've seen. That's what I'm not sure about. Because then would Embry be in front of Mike McDaniel? That really didn't make sense. But if Shanahan did get fired, you're right. Embry would have become the guy who would have become the next head coach.
I think that we need to hear from the 49ers. I really would like to hear from them. because I don't think that the whole concept of we hired a coach from the outside, so we have to have someone to translate it. I don't. That doesn't sit well with me. If you want this guy to be your DC, then make him your DC. If Sorensen's good enough to be the DC, then let him be the DC, and then make Staley like the defensive passing game. Give Staley Sorensen's old job.
What if Staley is there to assist Shanahan instead on game management?
I would love it. I
as
said
the
that.
Assistant head coach.
I said that. I was like, if there's ever a guy that might be able to convince Kyle to go for it on fourth down, it's freaking Brandon Staley. And to be honest with you, like, I would welcome that. Because I think it's a weakness of the 49ers. And I would absolutely love to see
you want
that.
Staley's game management, though?
Well, see, here's the thing, though, right? Like, if you get Kyle, ultimate conservative, and Staley, ultimate aggressive, you mix them together, you get one sometimes aggressive head coach. That's what I'm hoping for.
That's funny. But imagine that. That would be something. Or maybe Kyle wants Staley's help in something game planning on offense. Staley's a former quarterback.
What are his responsibilities, his day-to-day? I would be thrilled if he had do some stuff on the offense, do some stuff on the defense, do both. But I don't know that we're ever going to actually friggin' hear him, unfortunately.
I want to know what is the scheme stuff that he's presented in terms of evolving the Niners scheme based on his. That's what I'm most interested in. If it is playing more cloud coverage, then sure. But yeah.
The next evolution of the scheme.
Yeah, 100%. Aren't you not interested in that?
Well, they got to change something, I feel like, or at least change like the situational play calls. Because when Kyle's having to veto play calls in the Super Bowl, and it seemed like a lot of the big plays, especially on some of the crucial drives late in the game, it was easy for Patrick Mahomes. If you watch the JT O'Sullivan breakdown of Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, he's showing play after play where it's not like Mahomes is doing his crazy Mahomes thing, right? Where he avoids 3 rushers and does a sidearm perfect throw across the field. That's not how the 49ers got beat. The 49ers got out game plan. Mahomes is dropping back. Kelsey's wide open over the middle. They do a receiver. They do like mirrored routes, and one of the wide receivers is right open down the sideline. Like, it was not that difficult for Patrick Mahomes in crunch time. So if they can at least
Go ahead. My bad. No. And then I was gonna say, right, what you said when they called the timeout on him, it felt like, yeah,
that was when he lost his job.
Did it not?
Oh,
you and I said that. You and I didn't even talk about that. And the Monday after, we both agreed. Like, when they did that, like, he needs to go. It's over for him. And it had nothing to do with how good or bad he had done his job to that point. It just, like, you can't disrespect a guy like that and, like, show that much lack of belief in him and then bring him back for another year. Like, you clearly, when you go to that point, you cross the Rubicon.
Yeah, it's crazy. Is the fact that Wilks, like, that they brought in an outsider at all, was that not a sign that they didn't think anybody on the internal staff was ready?
No, what if it's a sign that maybe they think their defense needed something more? That's the question I have with Brandon Staley. Like, that's another thing I feel like that's being discounted in our kind of back and forth of that conversation. Like, what if they just wanted to add something a little bit more? They wanted to keep what they had, but they wanted to add an evolution of something more. Like, what if they felt like they needed that? Like, that's independent of Wilks. It's independent of all of that because the scheme was existing before Wilks. They might have felt like, hey, teams caught up on our scheme in some ways this year.
Well,
that also could be a part of it.
Wilks said during the year last year, the problems I was having was not because I changed the scheme. The problems I had was because I didn't change the scheme enough. Wilks said that. And when he said it, I was like, damn. That's really interesting to me that maybe the 49ers.
When did he say this? That's so interesting.
He said it. I was trying to find the exact date, but I know he said it for a fact because I used it in one of the 49ers in 5 episodes. I was trying to search through the transcripts the other day to figure it out. But he definitely said that. And it was interesting to me because I wondered if it was like they initially had told him, like, just do what D'Amico did. This is what everything D'Amico did. Study up on it and we'll be good. And then it was like, no, actually, teams have spent the whole offseason studying what D'Amico Ryans did, and they're prepared for it now. So you do have to change it and evolve it every year. So I need to try and go back and find the date of that quote.
That's so interesting though, because I felt like the first part of the year, and this is why I didn't make this point earlier in the show, was because I thought you would come back with me with the first part of the year. All they said was Steve Wilkes wasn't calling their defense as it should be called, and that was the issue. So I thought that would be kind of the counteraction for that, because we did have conversation about, oh, Wilkes not having continuity and not calling the defense the way they wanted earlier in the year. Then we thought it was a lack of defensive line issue, and then they got Chase Young and they became good for a while. Then Armstead got hurt and the run defense really fell off and really started to struggle. And so then that was when we got to the scheme might be a little bit figured out. And that's when I am assuming Wilkes might have made this quote as well. So there's been different points of conversations at different points of the season for the 49ers defense. It hasn't necessarily been like we pinpointed one issue, and that was the consistent the entire time.
So hopefully we hear from them, at least a conference call, something, right? Because I haven't even gotten, I don't know that they've officially been hired, because I haven't gotten that notice from the 49ers. Like usually when things are official, they'll send out an email. We just have the reports, and nobody from the Niners has confirmed any of this. So maybe when it does, we'll get a conference call or something. That would be cool. We did have a super chat I want to get to. Scott Hill. Thank you very much, Scott. Sorry it took a little while, but Vish and I were in the throes of an argument.
We were in the heat of it.
That's right. Scott says, hey, Rob, do you think the 49ers will draft a legacy player, Luke McCaffrey, who's Christian McCaffrey's brother, Brendan Rice, who, of course, is Jerry Rice's son, or Frank Gore Jr., who is Frank Gore's son? What do you think, Vish?
I have no idea how good they are.
Neither do I.
It more depends on that. I don't know much about any of them in terms of how good they are yet. But that's all I care about. I'm not as big into the legacy players, Rob.
I think it would be cool, like if they take somebody day 3 and they can get one of those guys, sure, But like day 2, are you taking Brendan Rice just because?
What if he's worth the day 2 pick though? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I don't know if he is.
Like, I'm not interested in getting Brendan Rice because he's Jerry Rice's son. I'm interested in getting Brendan Rice because he could be a good player for the 49ers. Same thing with Frank Gore Jr. Same thing with Luke McCaffrey.
Yeah, I don't know. If
they had Max McCaffrey for a while.
If you draft Brendan Rice, do you let him wear number 80?
Do you think Brendan Rice would want that?
Yeah, you know what? The young kids don't like the numbers in the 80s for wide receivers anymore. So he probably wouldn't want to do it. I did see that Luke McCaffrey ran the 40 faster than Christian by like a tenth of a second, something like that.
Yeah, he was testing off the charts, and it sounded like he was pretty good in the Senior Bowl. So I don't know because I never watched Luke McCaffrey, but maybe he's a really, really good player in his own right. But I don't want to discredit that and be like, hey, they should draft these guys because they're related to great 49ers.
Right. I mean, it'd be a cool story if it happens, but I'm not sitting there hoping. Unless we get to like the 5th round and one of those guys is still out there, then I say, what the hell, go for it.
If they're studs, then yeah. Or if they're drafting them, you don't have enough draft picks, man, to take somebody just because it's a cool story and then find out he's not good enough to make your team.
Pabs79 PES says, KJ Wright joining staff. Thoughts? We actually led the show with that, Pabs. We did touch on the KJ Wright thing. Short summary, we both love it.
Yeah, we both love it. You know what's funny, Rob? You know how you said that I don't need to come up with my takes or your takes for you? There's a guy in the chat that's just ripping takes for me. He says, we got to the point where Vish says Kevin Barlow was better than Garrison Hurst and Frank Gore. How about that?
When did you ever say that?
Beats me.
JC Montana. I see you in the chat, JC Montana. The only Kevin Barlow stan among us apparently is Vish Kumaran.
Oh, yeah. It's Kevin Barlow is one of my earliest 49er memories, actually. My dad hated Kevin Barlow. He hated Kevin Barlow so much. I was taught to hate Kevin Barlow as a kid. That's why I even brought up that comment, too. It's so much funnier to me because you got 5-year-old me and Kevin Barlow is my least favorite player. I don't have a clue what Kevin Barlow is or isn't doing, but my dad hated Kevon Barlow, as he called him.
There's a great story in that. There was that article about Frank Gore that came out a while ago where they drafted Frank Gore and they were like, look, Barlow's going to be the starter. And Frank was like, are you freaking kidding me? And then if you go look at that year, Frank's rookie year, Barlow had 581 yards on 176 carries.
Yeah.
Frank Gore had only 127 carries and had 608 yards and the same amount of touchdowns. And from that point on, it was like, you're done. Gore is the starter. And then the next year, I think Frank ran for like 1,600 yards.
Yeah, he ran for 1,600 yards the next year. And that was the year against Seattle. He had the 2 really long touchdown runs.
280 yarders, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly why my dad hated Kevin Barlow, or Kevon Barlow as he called him, because 2005 was like my first football season, and Frank Gore would like evidently, like, that Niners team was terrible, but Frank Gore would evidently get like 5 yards a carry, and then Kevin Barlow would get like 2 yards a carry, and so he just hated Kevin Barlow.
Yeah, Kevin Barlow was 3.3 yards per attempt that year. Gore was at 4.8.
That's crazy. The fact that their carries were the same too, that's Mike McCarthy for you.
Frank Gore is still one of the single most incredible football stories of all time. His mother has all sorts of problem with drugs. Frank grows up in poverty. Frank is severely dyslexic. Tears up his knee in college multiple times, tears ACL. I think he had 2 ACL tears.
2 ACLs, yeah.
Still gets drafted, comes into the NFL, and then after his rookie year in the NFL, gets major reconstructive surgery on both shoulders in the offseason, comes back and has 1,600 yards.
Yeah, and then plays 8 years after getting a serious hip injury in 2010. And what you didn't miss is he was recruited to the U, and he was such a high recruit that before he tore both those ACLs, he was supposed to play in front of Clinton Portis, who was a first-round pick, and then Willis McGahee, who was a first-round pick.
And Najee Davenport.
Yeah.
Well, all 3 of them.
A first-round pick, though.
No, I know, but like it was unquestioned. It was like, this guy is way better than them. It wasn't even like a thought. Frank Gore is one of the most incredible football stories of all time. And people, we forget like the little details like that now because he's retired and everything. You think
I'll never forget the moment that what I identify his career with is the 2012 NFC Championship game when they go down 17-0 and Julio Jones is going crazy. He's the greatest player we've ever seen for a quarter. And Frank Gore walks up to Jim Harbaugh and goes, "Calm down, let's run the football." And they show that even when they show the highlights. And it's like a subtle moment for Frank Gore because you just know that, but they then settle down, they start running the football, and then the Niners just dominated the rest of that game. And then, yeah, we don't need to talk about the rest of that season. We bring up 2013 maybe once or twice every month. So
when I think of Frank Gore, I think of, I can't remember which playoff game it was. It was one that the 49ers ultimately won. It might have been against the Panthers with Colin Kaepernick. I remember there was a 4th down play where Kaepernick is scrambling out and he throws the ball and he throws it to Frank Gore, who makes an unbelievable catch and gets a 1st down. And it was like, okay, great job. And then we come to find out actually Frank Gore had a broken finger on his hand.
I think it was the Panthers game. And it was really late in that game to close it. I think of the season didn't end great, but the 2013 when they had to beat Seattle and they had him at home and late, Frank Gore, I think 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 breaks, or 3rd and 1, I think he just breaks it and he breaks it long. And then Earl Thomas is chasing him down and he stays in bounds because he's Frank Gore. That would be the other one. And then Singletary's first game. I'm still upset about that game, Rob. Frank Gore was not down. He scored on that play. That was inadvertent contact. He stumbled. Oh.
Charlene says, I was so mad when Frank Gore left the Niners. He literally carried them. Steve Lyon says, I remember thinking Kevin Barlow was going to be a stud. Was super excited for him to get his chance. Then old Frank came along and I promptly forgot about Kevin Barlow and his weird face mask. Look, there's no shame in that, Steve. We all had guys that we thought were going to be studs. You know who I thought was going to be really good for the 49ers? It's actually a teammate of Frank Gore's, LaMichael James. I remember thinking LaMichael James might be a good little player. He would come in when everybody was tired and he would rip off like a 7 or 8 yard run. And I remember thinking like, hey, he could be good. Remember when the Niners are playing the Patriots in Foxborough and they go up huge on Brady?
The big kickoff return.
Yes, and Brady leads them all the way back and ties the game. And then LaMichael James has a massive kickoff return. And then like 2 plays later, Kaepernick throws a touchdown to Crabtree, and the Niners never gave up the lead again. I was like, this LaMichael James is going to be pretty
good. Something, right? And then he scores in the NFC Championship
game. We all have those guys. There's no
And he
shame in that.
fumbled in the Super Bowl. I've had a few bad ones. Um,
Joe
for
Latu says Taylor Mays.
yeah, I didn't have Taylor Mays, but I've definitely had a few pretty terrible ones when it comes to the 49ers, thinking someone was going to be an absolute stud and they turn out to be a little bit of a dud. Michael Crabtree, I don't think he was a dud, but he is my favorite player to this day. I thought he was.
I loved Michael Crabtree. My theory on Crabtree Vish is that if he had Brock Purdy, he would be Brandon Aiyuk. Like, I think Michael Crabtree could have been way better than what he put up, because I think he had great hands, and he was, especially for a guy that didn't have a lot of speed, he was awesome after the catch.
I agree. But yeah, Nick Nice 21 did say in the chat, for whatever reason, there was something off about Michael Crabtree that just made everybody think he was a little bit of a diva.
Well, don't forget, he started his career by holding out, and he missed
but that's because Eugene Parker was his agent.
Yeah, MC Hammer helped negotiate that deal, and that's
Right.
not an exaggeration. That is a real thing that happened.
And he came, but the cool thing about him was he would always have these like long lapses, and then he would come back and he would start immediately. Like in a week of practice, he started versus Houston in his first game. He started, after the foot injury. He started immediately after the Achilles when he came back. So yeah.
I love people just throwing out names. Diego, YouTube channel member, says, I thought Jared Hayne was going to be something. He was quite something, just something terrible.
Yeah.
That's
well said.
He did
well
have some
said.
crazy returns. I have to say, like, guys had a hard time tackling that dude. He just turned out to be a garbage human being.
I liked AJ Jenkins too. Not AJ
Oh.
Jenkins because I knew anything about him as a receiver. I didn't watch a minute of AJ Jenkins in 2011 at Illinois. But when you read AJ Jenkins' draft like profile, my dad always used to get like the Pro Football Weekly draft books for the longest time. Joel Boschbaum wrote them, I think, until like 2004, and then Nolan Naraki used to write them.
Nolan Naraki.
Yeah, that's a throwback name, and he used to always get them. And so when you read the profile for these players, it lists all their measurables like back to back to back next to each other. And when you read AJ Jenkins' profile, in 2012, I think the number one receivers were Justin Blackman and Michael Floyd. And AJ Jenkins is actually very like in the same vicinity in terms of pages, because Floyd's last name starts with an F and AJ Jenkins starts with an AJ. So when I would read about Michael Floyd and whatever, the J would catch you for AJ Jenkins, and you would read 6 feet, 190 pounds, 4.38 40, and 38 inches vertical, all of that. And when you read those numbers in succession, you would think like, wow, this guy's an absolute freaking stud. Like, why is he getting no draft hype? Because like you just read that height, weight, speed, and how it looked on paper, it looked like he would be a stud.
The only thing I'll ever remember about AJ Jenkins was that they were doing a live episode of the TV show 30 Rock during the draft, and they really wanted people to they wanted to emphasize that the 30 Rock episode was live. And so at the end of the theme, they talked about like how we're live. And the last part of the theme that one of the characters says is, the Niners just took AJ Jenkins. And I'll never forget that, because I was like, holy crap, this dude just mentioned the 49ers. That is literally the only thing about AJ Jenkins' career I ever remember, other than Jim Harbaugh like trying to convince us all that he was actually good when everybody could see in training camp that he stunk.
Right. Well, he did catch a touchdown in the last preseason game. My other one that's actually in this same boat is in 2007 when they drafted Jason Hill. It was the same thing with this draft book. Jason Hill ran 4.36.
Yeah,
at
he
the
was
combine.
fast.
He was fast. Calvin Johnson, the number one receiver that year, ran 4.37 at the combine. At the time, my dad had taught me that if you read the 40 times, how to read the 40 times on the draft book. So I rated players based on their 40 times. And I thought, dang, the Niners just got 4.36. He's better than Calvin Johnson, who was 4.37 in my head. But yeah, that one turned out to be a dud.
Yeah, well, Jason Hill was 6'1", 204. Calvin Johnson was 6'5".
Yeah.
Slight difference.
Try explaining that to a 7-year-old.
Right, exactly. So anyway, look, we all have those guys. I'm sure there'll be a guy that the Niners draft this year that I'll think is going to be awesome, and then he's going to end up not being awesome. Who the hell knows?
There's gonna be a couple guys like that for sure. Like Tarvarius Moore, when he was picked, like I thought, man, like 4.32 speed, his body looks good, all of that. Like I thought they were gonna get a stud. He did nothing. There's been other people. Crabtree, yeah, he's my favorite Niner. I
Cubs.
saw.
Yeah, Cubs 3EB. I don't know how you say that. Cubs Seeb. I don't know, but says Crabtree, Vish, he's your favorite player. Turn in your fan card. That's not fair to Vish.
It's not even like a Niners fan thing with Crabtree. I saw him in the Big 12 playing in college football, and like he was one of those players in college football, like Reggie Bush, maybe not as big as Reggie Bush, but one of those players for a kid that you put up on your wall and you think like, wow, what a stud. And it culminated with him having the catch versus Texas
Yep.
at or over Earl Thomas to win that game, like all of that, the double Blinken awards, all of that. He was that guy in college.
Hold on. The double what awards?
Blickentoff, however you pronounce it.
Not even close.
How do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it?
Bolitnikoff. After Fred Bolitnikoff, the famous Raiders wide receiver.
Fred would not have nailed Vish Kumaran, okay? So it's okay. Okay.
Yeah, Crabtree's college numbers are insane. In 2 years, he had 3,100 yards and 41 touchdown receptions.
So, yeah. So, like, when you see somebody like that, he became, like, an iconic college player. My first, like, wanting that was Reggie Bush, right? Because Alex Smith and Reggie Bush were high school teammates. And so my dad hyped it up in my head, and then they didn't get Reggie Bush. But Crabtree was, like, a player that I just imagined on the 49ers when he was in college. Like, you would never think of that happening. And it all came with it actually happening. So that's why he was my favorite player, because I love the guy in college, and the Niners actually got him. That was like an amazing moment for me as a fan.
The Niners got Michael Crabtree because the Raiders took a wide receiver, but they didn't take Crabtree. Can you name the receiver they took ahead of Crabtree?
Of course I can. I could probably name the first 9 picks in that draft as well, but it's Darius Hayward-Bay.
Because he ran the fastest 40 time, and Al Davis loved it. And I remember, because I was thinking I wanted Crabtree too. And then when they took Darius Hayward-Bay, I was like, oh my God, it's happening. And Steve Young was actually on the draft when they took Crabtree, and he was like, Jerry Rice lives 10 minutes away.
And you said you need a guy to run a slant for the West Coast offense who in this draft runs a slant better than Michael Crabtree. That was the line before they made the call. The funny thing was everybody thought they would go tackle because that draft was Jason Smith from Baylor, bust. Eugene Monroe from Virginia, good player for the Jaguars. Andre Smith, who went 7th to the Bengals from Alabama. And then the 4th guy that everybody thought they would take was Michael Orr. And people thought they would take Michael Orr at 10 because they needed a tackle, and Crabtree fell to them. They took Crabtree, and then the next year they took Anthony Davis.
Man, that was a crazy. Like, you know what? There's a lot of tackles that are projected to go this year. We'll see how it all works out.
That was a draft moment, though, fan-wise, Rob. Like, I think that was probably the most unbeatable draft moment for me, and that's why he was like my favorite player. Like, I've never had that moment where you're like, this is like the player in college. This is the coolest player. This is the player in the draft everybody is talking about. And it's like everybody wants him on their team. And he's actually right there for the Niners, and they got him.
You know what? That's true. Like he was he was the coolest. He was the guy. And it was like, oh my God, the Raiders are idiots and we get to take him.
Yeah.
Because the Raiders took Darius Hayward-Bay at 7 and the Niners picked at 10.
Yeah.
So you're sitting there now. You're like, is this really going to happen? Like there was buildup because you're like, is anybody going to trade up to get Crabtree? And then you had to watch the picks come off the board. And it was Eugene Monroe, like you said, to Jacksonville. BJ Raji went to the Packers.
Yeah, at 9, right? At 8.
At 9. And Crabtree went it. So it was like,
Where did Andre Smith go from Alabama?
Andre Smith went 6 to Cincinnati.
Andre Smith went before Eugene Monroe in that draft. I would have gotten that wrong. I would have said Eugene Monroe at 6, Hayward-Bay at 7, Andre Smith at 8.
So it was like, that's a very cool draft. Even when the Niners took Lance, like I didn't really know who to hope for out of the 3. Like I didn't want Mac Jones, but that was really my only hope. So it wasn't the same moment for me. I think the Crabtree
But I also didn't have a college quarterback that I'd been sitting on for a couple years that I really wanted the Niners to take, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Crabtree was like in the Big 12 from his redshirt freshman year, like a guy like, holy cow, everybody's like, this guy's a stud. He's winning should I say it correctly or should I say it how I said it?
Bolitnikoff.
Okay, fine. You know, he wasn't going to nail my last name either. He doesn't need me nailing his, but okay. Bolitnikoff award, yeah.
He was the first guy to ever win the Bolitnikoff award more than once. Yep.
First Nick guy Ellert, twice, and then Blackman did it twice.
Nick Ellert, YouTube channel member, says, I don't know. When they announced Kyler Murray to the Cardinals, I erupted for Nick Bosa. I assumed the Cardinals were taking Kyler Murray, so that I didn't have that shock value, but that was pretty cool too. You're right, because Bosa was kind of the badass of that draft.
Really? You were all the way there though? Because I was halfway Bosa, halfway Quinnen. Like it wasn't one
Oh
guy
no,
for me in that draft.
I was all the way
Bosa
Bosa,
Quinnen would have made me very happy too.
and he's turned into a very good player, also. By
Quinnen's
the way,
awesome, yeah.
yeah. It took a little longer for Quinnen than it did for Nick Bosa, but no, I was
Oh, so
100% on Bosa.
I didn't get that moment. You got it in that one. And then McGlinchey was like, I was hoping they would take like a Derwin or a Minka, something like that. So I
Oh,
was never like
man.
there for McGlinchey. And then the Solomon Thomas pick, I think I was hoping for a lot of other things because there were some really cool players in that draft that were not named Solomon Thomas. Some of the people I was hoping for turned out to be good. Some didn't turn out to be as good, but they all turned out better than Solomon Thomas.
Well, but that was like, that's why I hate when people say, oh, he's the safest pick. Michelle talked about this on Friday. There are no safe picks in the draft.
No.
Solomon Thomas was regarded as the safest pick. Like, we don't know how good any of these guys are going to be, but we know Solomon Thomas is going to be good. And guess what? He stunk. There are so many other people they could have had. Obviously, we know the main one they could have had at 10, Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, of course. Even Christian McCaffrey, right? There's so many different people. And in the name of, things that we were wrong about that we're doing in this show and things that we were stupid about, I was upset that they took Solomon Thomas. You know what was one of the names that I wanted them to take at 3, like really badly?
Please don't say Mitch.
Oh, no. It's probably even worse than Mitch, to be honest.
All right,
Reuben
who?
Foster.
Well, they said we would have been happy taking Reuben Foster at 3.
I would have been ecstatic had they taken Reuben Foster at 3. Actually Reuben Foster would be the other example, like Crabtree, where I just like loved a player. Everybody in college football could see Reuben Foster is just such a stud. And then he's right there for the 49ers at 30. They trade up for him. His first game, he looks great until he sprains his ankle. His rookie year ends up being pretty good, and then
disaster. Yeah, off the field, he was a disaster. Remember, he got kicked out of the combine, too. That was a thing that happened with Reuben Foster. Yeah. Chris Maldonado says, when they traded for Trent Williams on draft day, I was so hyped.
Yeah.
That was like, that was a little different because that was totally out of the blue. It wasn't like, hey, I'm hoping this happens, and then it happens. It was just like, oh, by the way, we got Trent Williams. And then they traded back into the first round to get Brandon Aiyuk. Like, that was a hell of a draft.
The Trent Williams trade was the next day. So they traded back to Brandon Aiyuk.
Was it
the COVID day? The next day, the Trent Williams. But at the time, we didn't know. The thing that was engaging was at the time we didn't know about the Staley thing, and then Mayoko, like the week before the draft, starts bringing it up as a thing. Like, oh, the Niners could go tackle Staley. Nobody knows what he's going to do. He could retire.
Yeah, interesting. God, there have been some moments. This team is never freaking boring, man. We will be here covering it all for you. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, like and subscribe to the Vish Kumaran YouTube channel as well. It'll make you a better, smarter fan. Vish, I always love talking, even when we fight.
I love it. I love when we do fight because honestly, looking back at our fight, I don't know if either of us made a good point. I think we just yelled at each other.
Yeah, sometimes you need a little of that too. We still have pent up rage from the Super Bowl. We still have to get it out.
Don't get me started there, please. I can't let it go. Please don't get me started.
We won't. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, everybody. Talk to you soon.